it's hard for me. Like, I feel like I never have the time to keep in touch with family or with friends or to do some of the things I need to do. When in reality, most of these things that are like stressing me out and overwhelming me that I feel like I never have the time to do are only like a couple minutes long, right? Like maybe 5 minutes each. And I was thinking about it. That's just the length of a YouTube video. All right, so I'm going to do this one take just like the last time. No expectations for what might come of this. We'll just see what happens. I stayed at work longer than I originally anticipated to, so it's already going to be sunset soon. So hopefully this doesn't take too long. I wrote a bit in my journal. Just realized I got my mask on. I wrote a bit in my journal about input versus output, consumption and creation. And so that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. So again, I've got my journal here because I will unapologetically be reading from it because I'm not going to try and memorize anything. It's just reading from what I've journaled, essentially. So I've had a pretty great day today. And why? There are a bunch of different reasons, probably, like how I took a cold shower in the morning, or how I used certain negative or unhelpful thoughts as fuel instead of letting them bring me down for the day. But I think the biggest thing that it comes down to is input and output, and consumption versus creation. This is what I was talking about before. So a lot of what I write about comes back to this, and I think that's really important. So most of the choices that we make on a day-to-day basis come down to whether we will consume or whether we will create. I see this a lot in my own life personally. So will I watch a YouTube video on self-improvement, or will I spend that time journaling and writing about my own journey of development, right? Will I listen to a podcast to fill the silence moments of my day, or will I give myself the space to actually think, to have thoughts, right? And so this kind of dilemma is something that at least I come across a lot, and I've noticed a lot of patterns. So by writing it like this, I might seem like I'm automatically assigning a value judgment where creation is inherently good and consumption is inherently bad. But it's more nuanced than that. So you need both, ideally, I think. There are a ton of things that I've consumed, like certain videos or games, that have had a tangible positive effect on my life, right? So I don't think that letting consumption out entirely, that dropping it entirely, is a good idea. However, at the same time, I think that we're in an existence that is plagued with too much consumption and not nearly enough creation. And that's a problem. I think it's a double problem because not creating has negative consequences. But at the same time, I think consuming too much on a daily basis also has a ton of problems. I'm going to check if my camera's recording. Cool. So I think that both of those are very problematic. Not creating enough and consuming too much. So I think some of the days that I've personally just feel the worst, the most aimless, the most overwhelmed and unfulfilled, are the days when I just don't give myself the space to think and to create. Right? I listen to a podcast or audiobook when I brush my teeth. I'll watch YouTube videos during my lunch. I'll scroll through Reddit while I'm in the bathroom, right? All these things. During my free time off of work, I'll slip into YouTube without even realizing it, right? Like my fingers just have the muscle memory. And I'll just watch videos for hours. Again, not even realizing it. By the end of the day, I'm lethargic, but I'm not tired. I'm overwhelmed, yet unfulfilled. I'll have spent the whole day taking in information, and by the time night rolls around, right, I'll remember almost none of it. So, along with having forgotten most of the day, like just what I did that day as well. So, then I become frustrated, right? I become frustrated because it feels like I don't have any time in the day for the things that I want to do, right? Where has all that time gone? And I'll get more into that later. Actually, no, I'll just talk about it now. Like I realized a couple days ago, there was this moment where I've been having some trouble just like keeping in touch with my family, for example, right? And that's like a whole loaded thing. But I called my mom and we talked for like somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, right? And that had a positive effect on me. It had a positive effect on her, and it just made me feel good. Like that was a good thing to have done. And all it takes is 5 minutes, right? but I always feel like I never have the time to do any of that, right? It's hard for me. Like, I feel like I never have the time to keep in touch with family or with friends or to do some of the things I need to do. When in reality, most of these things that are like stressing me out and overwhelming me that I feel like I never have the time to do are only like a couple minutes long, right? Like maybe 5 minutes each. And that I was thinking about it. That's just the length of a YouTube video. That's the length of like maybe a relatively short YouTube video, right? I watch some that are like 15, 20 minutes long, sometimes over half an hour. And that just makes me think, what is the comparison there, right? Like watching a 5-minute YouTube video. Some of them have been life-changing. I'll admit that, right? But not all of them. What is the value that I get from watching the average 5-minute YouTube video? And how does that value compare to talking with my mom for 5 minutes and rebuilding that connection? Maybe reaching out to a friend who I haven't talked to in a while. What is the value comparison there? That's something I've been thinking a lot about, because that's kind of mind-boggling, and I hadn't considered that before. But at some moments, it almost feels like I'm wasting my life away by consuming things, right? And again, like I said before, I don't think that consumption is all bad, but gosh, if I feel like I don't even have 5 minutes to talk to my mom, that's a problem, right? Like, because that's just 5 minutes. That's just a YouTube video, right? But I don't even realize that when I'm in it, because 4 hours, or let's be real, like 3 hours of watching YouTube videos goes by like in an instant, and I don't even realize it. And it's like weird to think that my life could be disappearing before me in that way. But that's getting sidetracked. Let me make sure I'm still recording, because that happens all the time. A little bit of an intermission. Cool, still recording. All right, so it sucks. Days like that suck, right? So sometimes it feels like I can physically sense my dopamine receptors getting fried, right? Like it's just, I get in this weird state where I'm just clicking on the next thing, trying to consume the next thing, and it just sucks. Some mediums are better and worse, right? Like, it is much harder to get that same feeling from reading a book than it is from watching a YouTube video, or on like the total opposite end of the spectrum, like watching a TikTok or scrolling on Instagram or Reddit. I have opinions, but those are for another video. So at the same time, we miss out on so much when we don't create. So it doesn't matter what form your creation takes, it'll feel good, right? When you give yourself the space to create, you allow yourself to think and to feel, right? The total opposite from just like switching your brain off and consuming, like I was talking about before. You can experience your reality without overstimulating your senses away. If you find something that works as an outlet, then you can also process your thoughts, emotions, and sometimes even trauma in a relatively positive way, right? Creation allows you to become absorbed in a process where you're able to feel yourself grow and ideally even contribute to something, whether that something is your own self-growth or other people, right? Or both, ideally, which is what I'm trying to do with making these videos. So the crazy thing is that once you've been starved for creation, sometimes your mind just starts to pile up with all of these unaddressed thoughts and feelings. And the moment that you start, everything just like comes flooding out, right? And it's just interesting to suddenly hear the thoughts that you've never allowed yourself to address, right? To feel the feelings that you just never let yourself have, right? Because I know I've been in situations where I just go so long ignoring myself, and then all of a sudden, like, every moment just feels like, I don't know, like there's some kind of like dark cloud looming around me, right? And kind of like constantly following me, and it's this kind of ambient stress. And that's something that it just sucks, and it infuses itself within every different aspect of your life, right? And oftentimes that's caused by ignoring those and not giving yourself the space to actually reflect on that, and to hear your thoughts, to feel your feelings, right? And so when you go so long without creating, it's easy for it to just kind of like start flooding in, and you start realizing all of these things that you hadn't before, right? And regardless of the form with which you're creating, creating involves output, right? It involves taking from within and moving it outwards. And through that process, you start to just realize and experience many of the things that you hadn't let yourself before. And I think that's like insanely helpful, right? In my experience, every time that I've prioritized creation, I've felt happier, brighter, more at peace, and just more productive and even more fulfilled, right? I give myself the space to really be and express myself, my thoughts, and my emotions, and every part of me is better for it. So then why do we overdose, right? If all of this is true, why do we overdose on consumption and struggle to prioritize creation if we create at all? I think, and it's not that creation is necessarily harder. In fact, I find like when I'm creating, I find myself drawn to it, right? Like today, I would, when I was at work, I would alternate between writing and working, right? And I was like handling some server, running some stuff on like a server, right? And every time that I would wait for these commands to run, I would just find myself going back, opening my journal, and just continuing to write because I felt like I had so much to write about, right? So I feel drawn to it. It's not hard, but at the same time, it's a struggle, right? To continue to prioritize creation. And so what I think it has to do with is the fact that once you fall off of like this idea of the creation train, it's hard to get back on, right? If I avoid consuming content before I create anything, I find that creating in any form is significantly easier. Even thinking, like just having my own thoughts, is easier. In a way, I think that it's kind of like having a question, right? If you have a question, like how can I get myself to start working out, for example, if you have access to like a smartphone and an internet connection, and you can just like, you have the question, how can I get myself to actually start working out? You can just look it up, right? You can just look up that question, literally just type it in on Google, and you will find tons and tons of answers and different strategies of ways that you can get yourself to start working out. But then it's so easier than thinking, right? Easier than actually just questioning that for yourself and thinking about that for yourself, right? And so in much that same way, I think there's just significantly more upfront cost to actively creating as opposed to passively consuming. So in that case, the only way that you would actually think about how you can get yourself to start exercising more would be if you limited yourself and didn't allow yourself to look it up. Likewise, I think we have to take a similar approach with creation, because if you have the option at every single moment to consume as opposed to creating, right? Like that's just a difficult decision to make, because consuming is passively consuming is significantly easier than actively creating, right? I'm just gonna do a quick recording check again. I've had too many videos go unrecorded and it's traumatizing. Anyway, so unless you prevent yourself from having the ability to consume actively, right? Like you give yourself that restriction, that limit, you're gonna feel drawn towards consumption, and it's going to be hard to really start creating and to feel drawn towards creating. And so it gets, the thing is as well, like it's not only about, so you can have that limit, but once you take that step into the side of consumption, right? Once you start that creating, like let's say you watch a YouTube video, right? Creating from there is just a little bit harder than it was if you hadn't watched it at all. Let's say you start getting on a binge and you watch maybe 3 or 4 or 5, 6 YouTube videos. With each of those, creating, at least in my case, I feel like it becomes exponentially harder, right? Like until the point where after I've been on that track of consumption for a whole day, it's basically impossible for me to start creating again, right? Like even just like writing some stuff down in a journal feels significantly, like it has a significantly higher upfront cost. And so I think it's important to just kind of set that standard for yourself from the start of the day. And that's what I do with myself. And so that's the reason, I think that's the primary reason as to why I felt like I had such a great day today. Like I have made great strides in terms of my own like journaling. I've written a lot today, a lot more than I have the last recent days, right? And I've made a lot of progress. And also like just in my work, like I had the most productive day today at work that I have in honestly weeks, right? And that's with me having journaled half the time, right? It's just like giving myself the space to think and to have that awareness is just, it's just wild, the effect that it has. And so, yeah, um, it's just so much easier to fall off of the path of creation than it is to to leave consumption, right? Because the moment that you fall off, it just gets harder to get back on track with creating. And so for this reason, I think it's important to like leave consumption until later on in the day. Because again, I still think that there are a lot of positive things that can come from consuming things, right? Like I've had video games that have changed my life. I've watched movies that have just given me a new perspective, right? Reading books has been shown through studies to help you develop empathy, right? There's and just learning, right? Like there's so much that you can get from consuming things. And I don't want to like cut that out entirely. But at the same time, I think it's important to know when. And I think that that consumption activities should be left for closer to the end of the day after you've allowed yourself the space to create, right? And so, yeah, that's something that I've been thinking a lot about because it's had just, I just notice every time it's my best days, and there's a lot of factors that go into having a good day or a bad day. But one thing that I have noticed, a pattern, is my best days are always those in which I prioritize creation, right? There are some days that I prioritize creation that are not my best days, but my best days are always the ones where I prioritize creation. And my worst days are almost always the ones where I'm just consuming without end, where the day disappears into some strange, into some strange haze of dopamine and clicking on the next thing. And so, yeah, I think that's all I've got for this one, but hopefully that has helped you. And, stay tuned. I'll be coming back with more of these within the next couple of days. I'm enjoying this process that I've kind of like stumbled across. So, yeah, there you go.